after 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, honorable judges, fellow debaters, and the audience. Today we stand in strong support of the motion that this House would ban permanent membership in the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council consists, it's just a body under the UN, and this consists of 15 members with 10 non-permanent members, and then with 10 non-permanent elected members by the General Assembly for every 2 years, for 2 years terms. And the UN Security Council's objectives is 1, to maintain international peace and security, authorize peacekeeping operations, and then refer cases to the ICC, impose sanctions to enforce its decisions. And the 5 permanent members are US, Russia, China, France, United Kingdom. Okay, currently the 5 countries, under the Security Council, they have the veto, which they hold the veto power, which allows any of them to block decisions, even if all the countries agree. And this system was created after World War II, and it's still in place today. Today we stand as the team affirmative, and we support the motion that we want to ban the permanent membership in the UN Security Council. We don't want to ban the UN, we want to ban the permanent membership and in the UN Security Council. And because 1, we see that there is representation gaps whereby for example, Africa, we are not represented. We feel like Africa is not represented, and there is representation gaps whereby these guys are using their veto power to actually benefit themselves for political interest and not for global good. Because literally, these guys are supposed to make decisions which affect the whole world, and in so doing, they affect the whole world. Whereby Africa, we feel like other countries are not represented. For example, India and China and Brazil, they are also global powers which have also come up. And this system was actually chosen. The UN was the current permanent members were elected in 1945, but then we see that the world has actually changed, and these guys are still in power up to now. They are using their veto power to actually benefit themselves rather than the whole world. Check it.
How will you ban?
How will we ban? We are going to banning it. Representation gaps, like I said, the veto blocks peace and justice, whereby permanent members have used their vetoes to stop actions during the humanitarian crisis. For example, Russia blocked resolutions about the Ukraine war, and also the US blocked actions on the Palestine. This shows how the veto used their power for political interest and not for global good. It has also weakened global trust, whereby most of the world sees this UN as controlled by a few, and this makes smaller nations feel powerless, and it damages the UN's credibility. In conclusion, permanent membership in the UN Security Council is unfair, it's outdated, and it's harmful. If we want a fairer, more peaceful world, this system must change. We proudly support the motion. Thank you.
Okay, Chair. In today's debate, we feel that Team Affirmative has done for us great injustice. And first of all, they didn't clearly show us the key terms of this resolution and what they clearly mean, right? So allow me to actually fulfill that obligation. So first of all, permanent membership in the UN Security Council, realize that this permanent membership is that these countries, the P5 countries, they have permanent seat in the Security Council, and they have veto power, right? That's one thing they have to get. And secondly, these countries, why they have the permanent membership status is because of the World War II victories that they achieved, and secondly, because of the major military and economic powers of that time, right? And you also realize the veto power was a pragmatic compromise to ensure global buy-in and avoid failure that the League of Nations had. Remember, the League of Nations fell out because it had buy-in from global superpowers. By then, USA was not part of the League of Nations. Italy and Germany withdrew from the League of Nations. That's why you see when Italy went ahead and invaded Ethiopia in 1930, when Italy invaded Ethiopia, there was no way the League of Nations could come up and actually sanction them, or let's say reprimand them, because they were not part of it. And also, there was no way you could involve, let's say, USA, or because if you lack the global engagement, you don't then have superpowers to implement your sanctions. They don't understand that. So they also don't understand that these permanent members, they have parallel interests, right, in global issues, particularly maintaining strategic and geopolitical position. For example, Russia, USA, China, and USA. Realize that China and USA, they have their own parallel interests. So the permanent membership gives them incentive to remain in the United Nations Security Council, because there's no other global platform where you find USA and China coming together to sit and discuss issues that actually affect them. So it's only the UN Security Council where they then have that active incentive to actually remain tied and discuss global issues that affect them. challenges, they don't calculate show us the challenging status quo that exists. We ask them how they are going to ban, because realize these nations have veto power, right? That means if you try to raise any policy that's against banning, they'll kind of veto it out and they won't be able to ban. It is a policy motion. They have to show us how they're going to ban. They don't do that. They tell us that the veto power is used in political interests. They tell us we have representation gaps. They tell us global world dynamics. But then we tell them that the permanent membership is not the cause of injustice. The real source of inaction and bias is not permanence in itself, but geopolitical self-interest and rivalry which exists in status quo. And through reforms, you can be able to actually solve these challenges. I'm going to show you how you can then solve the challenges. Realize countries like Russia, USA, China act based on national interest, and it's not because the permanent members. That means even though Russia, all these countries will remove permanent memberships, that they would still act in their same decision. That means permanent membership is not the problem, chair. In this debate, even if veto is removed, these countries, even if the veto power that they have through permanent membership is removed, this country can still decide to ignore UN Security Council resolutions, just like the way USA did in Iraq in 2003. They can decide to withdraw from the bodies of the UN Security Council. And look at these permanent members. They are global powerhouse. They fund about, USA alone funds about 25% of the UN budget, right? So when you have such a global power, not having incentive to remain in such an organization, you see the legitimacy then goes away, right? Then the better solution to solve the problem has to be brought about. I want to ask affirmative questions. How do we manage global powers after banning permanent membership? Especially when dealing with hard to negotiate powers like China and Russia. Can you point a single clause in the UN Charter that allows permanent members to be stripped of their status? If in a council where no country has veto power, what will stop a hostile majority from passing politically motivated sanctions or inversions, right? Then our solution on our side of the house, we rather have reforms like expanding permanent member seats to include countries like Brazil, India, Nigeria, Japan, which are actually also global powerhouses right now because of the military troops that they have, because of the mightiness in the armies that they have and the money. We also have making reforms which have been tabled. For example, we actually have veto restrictions but not removal of the veto, whereby we have veto, you cannot use the veto in cases of mass atrocities like genocide. And we also make veto use a subject to public negotiation or discussion in the UN General Assembly, whereby they have to explain the reason why they actually veto. They actually present a veto case, and in such a decision, then if 2/3 of the majority of the council agrees on it, then they pass it out. We believe our case is better. We solve the problem. We win the debate.
This is the High School Crossfire. We'll be back in a minute. This is the High School Crossfire. Welcome back.
This house would ban permanent membership from the UN Security Council. Okay, what side negative argues is, you know what, permanent membership, or us banning permanent membership, or whatever that is happening from the UN is due to some certain rivals, or they feel like they're not going to necessarily ban a permanent membership because they feel like it's due to geopolitical rivals. But yeah, there's something you need to understand at stake. Okay, if they claim that it's due to geopolitical rivals, then why do these countries take an extra step to sort of like veto different resolutions that are not even part of these particular powerful nations? Okay, let's say US vetoes something that is just part of Russia but not China. Why are these things still happening if they say it's due to geopolitical rivals? Anyways, so they claim that, you know what, they have reforms, or they feel like they should go and run reforms instead of banning permanent membership states. So chair, one thing you need to understand, if we still have the same system running year after year, we are still going to face the same problem. So if they claim that they are going to try to reform and then do whatever they are going to do, but nothing is going to change, because remember, these are the same particular countries that are going to be running the same particular system. So if they claim that, you know what, they are going to increase the permanent membership seats, they are going to do what? They are going to increase the permanent membership seats, but they're not going to take away countries like USA, they are not going to take away countries like China, they are not going to take away countries like Russia, which means the system is going to still operate in the same manner. They are not solving any problem, but rather running away from the problem. What we want them is to solve the problem that is within the system. Even if they claim for revoking the UN Charter, still these particular countries can revoke the UN Charter. Do you agree with me? Okay, anyways, take it.
Is the problem the presence of the US in the Security Council, or the presence of the permanent membership in the council?
The problem is the presence of permanent membership is giving these particular countries more power to decide or to revoke resolutions that are affecting the whole world, or that are affecting us globally. So just to go into our arguments, the reason as why we are banning, okay, they even asked a question that how are we going to ban okay, we are going to ban them from being permanent members of the UN Security Council, and we are giving all the powers to the General Assembly. Why are we giving all the powers to the General Assembly? We believe that the General Assembly, each country is represented equally and no country is given more superior power. That's why we are giving it to the General Assembly. Like, the General Assembly has equal representation. It's solving the problems that are faced by the five powerful countries. Because if you look into incidences, the General Assembly can sort of, like, if we give the General Assembly powers, it's then going to be in position to decide to make resolutions that are going to help out the world. Because remember, the General Assembly, each world is represented equally, which means they are not going to make things in favor of one world, or they are not going to make things in favor of another one. Okay, just to run our arguments. One, the sovereign equality of states. That's the first principle. The reason that's why we are giving it to the General Assembly. All nations, regardless of economic or military power, deserve equal say in the international decision making. That's why, in other words, we need to give it to the General Assembly, because each country is represented equally. If we say we are going to increase the permanent membership seats, again, the other countries that are not going to be represented, it means the same problems are still going to happen in the system. So, secondly, the reason as why we are giving it to the General Assembly, accountability and transparency. The veto power allows nations to act with impunity and avoid accountability for global harms. The General Assembly is not going to act with impunity, because, on the other hand, every country has a right to say, or it means even if we give it to the General Assembly, we are going to achieve things like democracy. Like, if the third of the quota votes for something, that's when they are going to buy into that idea, or that's when they are going to go for that idea. But if we still claim that these particular members, or we are still going to increase on the permanent membership seats, it's not going to make any sense, because we are just bringing more problems to stake. It means other countries are still going to use that same power to veto other resolutions, or to also do the same thing that has been happening. We are still going to face the same things in status quo. Then lastly, we have global opinion. A survey by the Council on the Foreign Relations found out that 60% of the surveyed nations supported the UNSC reform, including the removal and limitation of veto powers, and even the removal of permanent membership seats. I beg to submit.
All right, panel. I'll start my speech by asking a few questions to the team of farmers. One, if Article 108 of the UN Charter requires approval by the P5 members to amend the Charter, how will you abolish permanent membership without their consent? Two, if your model is revolutionary, what is your enforcement mechanism when powerful countries refuse to recognize it? Three, if you ban permanent membership, do you expect the US, China, Russia to willingly submit to decisions made by temporary weaker states? Because, panel, we need to understand that these countries such as China, Russia, USA, France, they contribute to about 48% of the UN funding, given the fact that USA contributes to 22%, China 15.25%, France 4.3%, UK 4.2%, Russia 2.0. So this actually amounts to 48% of the funding. So two, let me paint for you a picture of how the world would be if we ban permanent membership. One, we're looking at geopolitical instability, a decline in diplomacy, institutional irrelevance. One, in geopolitical instability, the P5 countries may boycott the UN. There's a rise in parallel institutions such as the BRICS, the NATO, and these that act outside the UN mandate. Three, the Security Council actually loses enforcement power. Two, the decline in diplomacy. There's no incentive for power balancing. Smaller countries that are vulnerable to pressure without great power oversight. So back to what I was saying. We need to understand that the global governance requires realism, not idealism. Okay? And in realism, we see that powerful states must be institutionally involved and incentivized. So in the analysis of this, the system does not ignore the global south, non-permanent members, we rotate and influence key decisions. Multilateralism without power balancing leads to irrelevance, such as the League of Nations. So when we go into the comparative of this, a world without the P5 veto, right, allows more resolutions but less implementation, creating symbolism and not practical importance. So back to it, we need to understand that when they talk about representation gaps that expand, we need to expand the seats of these countries. So now we need to understand that we are looking at reforming membership diversity, which is possible, but not removing the permanency of these countries. So the premise of this is that the problem is that there's no lack of representation, that the problem is the lack of representation and not the existence of the permanent seats. So the analysis of this is that the proposal for expanding permanent membership, such as the Brazil, the African Union countries, are more realistic and productive rather than abolition. So removing permanent members would create massive backlash, as the P5 would veto such a change or withdraw creating a weaker and less credible United Nations. So when we look at the comparative of this, we need to understand that a reformed performance that we are fronting for actually fronts for legitimacy and stability. Whereas for theirs, there's actually no performance, which results into instability and fragmentation. So back to it, the impact is that maintaining permanent seats while adding diverse voices strengthens both function and fairness within the United Nations Security Council. So, ladies and gentlemen, we need to understand that the General Assembly does not also have the legally binding power, meaning that it cannot implement policies in these countries. Then two, the lack of representation after adding the permanent members can be solved, as I've said. So the metrics of choosing these members is based on regional equality and how much such countries uphold human rights. Given the fact that we can get countries through the regional blocks, we can get a country from the East African community, we can get from the Far East and the North, and we see to it that we actually solve their problem that they front of the lack of representation. Two, when they come to us and they tell us that there is the geopolitics in this, we need to understand that the UN is a consensus-based body and major powers will not comply with decisions that they fundamentally oppose with or without the veto. That goes down to the veto power thing. So the analysis of this is that the veto does not create a gridlock. It reflects real geopolitical divisions, and without the veto power, powerful states would either exit or ignore the institution. I beg to submit.
This is the High School Crossfire. We'll be back in a minute. This is the High School Crossfire. Welcome back.
Contradiction in the house today. So the team affirmers today come and tell us that actually what we brought up on board is actually not necessary. But here we are telling them that actually we are here to ban the permanent membership in the UN Security Council. The reason why we came up and said we are supposed to ban them, and we clearly told them the reason why and how we are going to do this. We are actually going to make the permanent seat actually become ordinary like the rest, whereby after 2 terms they will also still come back in and become again and come again, and they will be voted instead of always being there in the same seat year in year out and ruling others. Ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing that they came here and told us that actually how are we going to do that without their consent, ladies and gentlemen. But we are seeing that actually they have forgotten that actually we have the sovereign equality of states, that it's a principle in the UN Charter, where it is written in the Article 2.1 of the UN Charter, where we see that organization is based on the sovereign equality of all its members, where we see that all members, regardless of power, economic and all those stuff, have equal say in the international decision making, ladies and gentlemen. If they are to talk about that, how are we going to ban them without their consent? We are seeing that actually each member has the right, ladies and gentlemen. And before something happens, we see that actually each member in that UN organization has the right to come in and discuss about this. And ladies and gentlemen, they came here and they are talking about that. And we came here and told them that we have accountability and transparency. The reason why we want to ban this, because we want accountability and transparency. These UN guys, we are seeing that actually the veto power allows nations to act with impunity and avoids accountability of global arms. We are seeing that the reason why we are saying this, it's because these countries are actually riving against each other. That we are seeing that actually Russia voted 17 the UN Security Council resolutions on Syria between 2011 and 20, blocking action on the war crimes and humanitarian aid. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are telling us that actually we shouldn't ban them and just increase them, how are we going to solve this, ladies and gentlemen? Because we are saying that we are actually leaving these guys on power. We are not changing anything, ladies and gentlemen. We are actually giving them more and more authority to do what is not necessary here, ladies and gentlemen. And we are seeing that actually the UN Security Council here we are talking about is actually something that is a global thing, ladies and gentlemen, and it affects the whole global nation, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't only affect them, but these guys are actually coming up on board and actually doing things that only benefit them, ladies and gentlemen. We are seeing that actually the United States of America went against Russia when they came up on board that they want to stop the war that is coming up, and we are seeing that actually they are actually going against their own, they are going up for their own interests. But ladies and gentlemen, the UN body actually It's supposed to protect and give peace for the whole nation, ladies and gentlemen. That's the reason why we are coming up and we are saying that we should ban them. Ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing representation gaps. And here they told us that they are going to increase seats. How is this going to be possible? Because we are seeing that the UN body has been here for a long period of time, and we have never seen any nation from Africa that has been represented. Then how sure are we that they are going to come up with a solution that will bring the African guys on board? They should come and show us how they are going to do this, where the African guys are going to come up on board and be part of the permanent membership. Ladies and gentlemen, we came here and told them about the global opinion, ladies and gentlemen. We see that actually a survey that was conducted by the council, we see that actually foreign nations found out that 60% of, I'm in my protected time, thank you. We are seeing that by the council, all the foreign nations found out that 60% of the surveyed nations supported that they should reform, including the removal and limitation of the vital powers, the only nation, a few. And ladies and gentlemen, if we are saying that most people are coming against it, then we are saying that actually there is a loophole in this thing. I beg to rest my case.
This House would ban permanent membership on the UN Security Council, right? So understand, Pan, whatever that they bring forth does not have a policy backup onto it, right? But even if their third speaker came in and kind of brought to us their policy, right? We shall engage it even though it's in third speech, right? So, Pano, understand that the first thing that they come and say is that they're going to come and ban, right? But they don't clearly explain what they are banning, right? Understand that the UN Charter has a number of articles. You can't ban every article that is there. You need to specify to us which article are you banning. That's one thing that they fail to understand in this debate that my speakers have currently brought up. Two, you need to understand that the policy, that power that is being given that they want to give the power to UN General Assembly and all, right? But understand that the UN General Assembly does not have the legalizing powers, all those powers to implement the laws that they want to implement at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, whatever they want to bring forth in their UN General Assembly won't be implemented. And without implementation, there is no efficiency. And without efficiency, there is no global growth, and there is no economic growth, and there is nothing that they will achieve at the end of the day compared to our side, right? So, Pano, in terms of what we bring forth to you, right? So, they come, in terms of comparative analysis, right? They come and say that on our side of the house, we need to ban the permanent membership. Why? Because it has proven to us that it has actually been filled with flaws and all those sorts of things, right? But we understand that, yes, the flaws have been existent. That's why my first speaker brought to you two major reforms, as one of them being the first one of expanding the permanent seats, which includes bringing countries like Brazil, India, Nigeria, and even the African countries that they are trying to cater for will be catered for. Why? Because in current days, according to the UNPress.org, we have seen France and China wanting to bring in more African countries, but not necessarily removing the permanency at the end of the day, right? And the second thing that we brought to you was the veto restrictions, right? We showed you that at the end of the day, there's going to be the veto restriction. Why? In cases of mass atrocities like genocides, like my first speaker said, that means we are going to make veto use a subject to public explanation, i.e. they explain to the UNCA why UNSC why they did it and how it then is bad, and then if it's so, 2/3 of the members will then vote, right? And if 2/3 take on, that means it will be passed at the end of the day. That shows you that we have veto restrictions happening, and when there is veto restriction, there's going to be a more kind of nuanced understanding, and the decisions that are going to be vetoed are not going to be made just by malice like they're trying to say. So that does mean that we don't need necessarily to remove the permanence at the end of the day, right? Now on efficiency, right? Understand that when you remove the veto, right, it means that you're going to have action that is more on some sort of basis that doesn't have like the logistics. Why? Because you're going to have backlash from these countries, right? And when you have backlash, you don't have the support to it, right? But compared to our side of the house, where you have this thing of permanency being kept intact, right? But what we do is that we restrict, first of all, the veto powers, and two, we expand the number of seats, right? What that shows you is that we are going to have decision-making centralized, right? And to that extent, it's going to be promoting operational efficiency, right? Now, that extent will then show you that there's going to be more enforcement power and logistical capacity to ensure that whatever that we bring forth comes into play, compared to the other side of the house, where they have no logistical power. Why? Because the people funding them won't be there to help them at the end of the day, right? Now, two, we bring in the question of feasibility, right? Understand that whatever that they are bringing forth in terms of rebuttal and everything, right? They did not bring it in first case scenario. Why? Because they didn't create for us how they are going to ban at the end of the day, right? We showed you that in order to ban, first of all, we need to understand which article you're going to ban specifically in the UN General Assembly, right? And to that extent, it means that you need to require and you need to have like an amendment of these laws, right? Understand that that's highly improbable. Why? Because these countries are still in veto power, right? But understand on our side of the house, when you have this veto restriction being brought into play, you then bring whatever decisions that have been vetoed to question in the UN General Assembly, right? And two, we expand the number of seats, including the African countries that they are bringing forth, right? To that extent, it means that there's going to be more real politics on our side of the house compared to their side of the house. And on that cost-benefit analysis, we then prove to you that we have won this debate. Thank you very much.
This is the High School Crossfire. We'll be back in a minute. This is the High School Crossfire. We'll be back in a minute.
Resolved, this House would ban permanent membership from the UN Security Council. Speaker, in a world facing nuclear tensions, climate change and terror, can we afford to destabilize the only body where major powers talk? Yes. Okay. Do you believe smaller countries will trust a UN where power is always shifting? Pardon, please. Do you believe smaller countries will trust a UN where power is always shifting? Okay, you don't know. Doesn't the requirement of a vote minimum create a check on the P5 dominancy? Okay, you don't know again. Aren't the United Nations Security Council meetings consistently broadcasted on media platforms? No, not all of them. Ignorance. Okay. Oh, you said not all of them, meaning some of them are broadcasted, right? Yes. What does that imply? It implies transparency and accountability at the end of the day. Okay. Transparency is not in bits. Listen. Isn't regional representation already addressed through rotational non-permanent members? Isn't regional representation already addressed through rotational non-permanent members? No. Okay. Who are you in today's debate? First speaker from Team Affirmative. Oh my God. Okay. Who are you to oppose a resolution of the UN? Okay, you don't know. You remain a fourth speaker. Do you think superpowers will influence decision making in your side of the house? Please repeat. Don't you think superpowers will influence decision making from your side of the house? No. Okay. How do you intend to address the question of finance in your policy? There is no. Do you realize states explain why they have vetoed out their various decisions? Do I? You don't recognize. Okay. If Article 108 of the UN Charter requires approval by 5 members of the Permanent Security Council, how will you abolish permanent membership without their consent? Okay, so in today's debate, we do recognize that what they do present as affirmative team is just fallacies and all that. Ladies and gentlemen, in today's debate, they have no way on how they're going to cover up for the instability they're creating. They have no way they're going to cover up for their finances and all that at the end of the day. Now, the question they do present to us is transparency and transparency. I clearly inquired from him, do you recognize that there is a minimum number of votes the Security Council wants to have so as to pass a resolution? He said yes. And how many votes are those? Those are 9 votes, meaning 5 from the permanent members and 4 from the others. That clearly shows that there is a check and balance mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, we also do recognize that once these permanent members go on to do various mistakes and all that, the General Assembly comes out to criticize them. That shows that there is a check and balance mechanism at the end of the day. And by the mere fact that most of these meetings are being broadcasted, are being broadcasted on social media platforms, it clearly shows that there is transparency at the end of the day. Now, they clearly don't show us how their policy will bring about accountability and transparency at the end of the day from their side of the house. Now, they also do not explain properly how they are going to do this. They don't tell us what articles of the UN Charter they are going to actually come out and amend, meaning they don't have sufficient research to address us in today's debate. Ladies and gentlemen, we have clearly told you the main concept in today's debate is not the presence of the permanent members. The concept in today's debate is that we as Team Negative, we are basically going to carry out 2 things. We are going to carry out reforms, basically reforms whereby we are going to actually limit the veto authority and all that. And we actually come and show you that in our policy there is feasibility, necessity, and actually we come out and clearly explain the effects and the consequences of what happens at the end of the day. They clearly don't come out and show us scenarios whereby the UN permanent members have come out to actually bring havoc and all that to the world and all that. Ladies and gentlemen, from their side of the house, we do recognize they don't understand that still superpowers will be able to influence decision making, even in the General Assembly. Why are they able to do this? It is because they're the main financiers and all that. At the end of the day, we believe we present a better case than they do.
For Speaker, do the permanent five nations have more power than other countries in the UN?
Yes, they do over Security Council.
Can a single permanent member block a resolution that 190 other nations support?
Pardon that?
Can a single permanent member block a resolution that 190 other nations support?
With justifiable reasons.
Do any African or Latin American countries hold permanent seats?
Pardon that?
Do any African or Latin American countries hold permanent seats?
Do they need to hold one? And
Yes,
at the end of the day, what is the relevance of them
Has
holding
the
one? The
UN
point is
Security-
efficiency, not numbers.
Has the UN Security Council failed to stop conflicts like Syria because of vetoes?
It is not basically because of the vetoes, it is because of what is happening
Are
in
not-
Syria and the diversity of that. However, we recognize their effects towards trying to end the conflict.
Thank you. Okay. Do the permanent five members ever act in self-interest rather than global interest?
No, they act in global interest. It is very rare when
Should
they do
global
that.
decisions be blocked by the will of a single country?
Pardon that?
Should global decisions be blocked by the will of a single
But
country?
that doesn't happen because at the end of
Yes
the day,
or
there are
no?
9 votes that are
Yes or
required. No.
Is the current structure of permanent membership representative of the global community? Okay.
Pardon
Does the
that? I
permanent-
want to answer your most previous question.
Is the current structure of permanent membership representative of the global community?
Not really, but it gives
Does-
out the
yes
right
or no?
leadership to bring about peace in the global community.
Does the permanent membership structure undermine the principle of sovereign equality among UN member states?
It doesn't undermine because it brings out resolutions for the betterment of every state.
Have permanent members used their veto power to further their national interests at the expense of global?
Account for that.
I'm asking you for a yes or no.
If you can't account for it, then why pose a question like that? In simple terms, it's a no, it doesn't apply.
Are non-permanent members rotated regularly?
Pardon that?
Are the permanent members rotated?
No, they're not rotated regularly. It's the non-permanent members. The permanent members are
Could
consistent.
rotating?
Surprisingly, you're not aware of that. Ignorance once again.
So, today's resolution says that this House will ban permanent membership from the UN Security Council. So, we actually see that a single permanent member can block a resolution that 190 other nations support. We also see that in African and Latin American countries hold no permanent seats, showing representation gaps. We also see that the UN Security Council has failed to stop conflicts like the Syria because of their vetoes. They have veto powers and they're using them not appropriately. We also see that the permanent five members sometimes act in self-interest rather than global interest, which affects the globe internationally. We also see that the decisions can be blocked by the will of a single country, showing that these people's veto powers should be banned and the permanent membership should be banned from the UN Security Council. We also see that the current structure of permanent membership is not representative in the global community because we see that Africa, they are not represented, which still shows representation gaps. We also see that the permanent membership structure undermines the principle of sovereign equality among UN member states. So, I want to, as I said, that representation gaps are seen in the current structure of the UN Security Council because the Security Council has been unable to agree on a unified response to the Syrian conflict due to the disagreements among the permanent five, resulting in a devastating humanitarian crisis. We also see that in Ukraine, Russia's veto power has prevented the Security Council from taking strong action. Right. I just raised my guess.
Thank you all debaters, the two antagonistic sides, for this submission. The resolution stated that this House will ban permanent membership from the UN Security Council. The resolution, as is, from the base of its interpretation, is a policy resolution. It means that it creates specific burdens to either speaker on the first affirmative and first negative. I felt that the construction of the case in the beginning burdened especially team affirmative, because whereas the justification for a ban of permanent membership on the UN Security Council is delivered effectively and efficiently, The question of practicality that keeps coming in speech number 3 and number 4 of the negative side could be resolved through a basic construction of a solid policy. First, a question is raised. What is the practical nature of banning permanent membership? Because you would need the consent of permanent members first. Second, you're not going to amend anything without their approval. But third, they control such a significant majority of geopolitical operations that therefore any attempt to diminish their power is not practical per se. Perhaps a better resolution construction would have come up. Team negative, on the other hand, whereas an understanding of why the veto powers ought to be maybe not be diminished per se, but through expansion of the UN Security Council's revolving members, it is a good discussion. It still does not fulfill part of the burden that you need to fulfill, which comes from number 1. Before you say that there exists no resolution or no statute that Team Affirmative is amending, you would ask your first speaker, what is he amending? Number 1, to increase the membership on the UN Security Council. He also cites nothing. To curtail the powers or to curtail veto powers, the procedure of veto powers, you also speak of nothing. This is the note that I get from that. That this resolution is effectively an overhaul of the international legal system as we see it. The UN Security Council is it has metamorphosed more into a tool of international law, because across various statutes, resolutions of the UN Security Council are relied upon. Their powers are cross-cutting. Therefore, anything that seeks to interfere with delimitation of powers within the UN Security Council requires an overhaul of the international legal order, and therefore a construction of a solid policy. The mark allocation is as follows. For either side, I give you 25 for style. The styles were impeccable. For strategy is where I differed, but I would like to caution us especially on style. When we step on stage, especially to our fourth affirmer and fourth negator, if at all you see a non-compliant person on the other end, just go forward with your questioning. And then it goes to cross-examiner from the negative team. If at all you cannot afford the same courtesy that's been given to you in your speech to a member of the opposite bench, it just does not look nice. And calling them all sorts of things like ignorant. I mean, there are so many things Team Negative was ignorant about, but we are here to judge what has been presented on stage and not call each other out. Thank you so much. The mark allocation is as follows. 25 either side for strategy, 15 for style, Team Affirmative, 14. But the content I deferred, and clearly it's because of a poor case construction. I gave you 22, Team Affirmative, and I gave 28 to Team Negative, making a total of 62, Team Affirmative, 67, Team Negative.
Thank you so much. Despite the fact that in the framing, this is a resolution that was policy, on the other side, this is a resolution that could also be argued as value. And that is why you find some critical thinkers could say that even like every policy resolution has a value in it, because at the end of the day, there is a comparison. So at the end of the day, this was a resolution that could also be taken as value by any side. Now, one of the questions that the judges keep on asking from the start is, are both teams taking it to be policy, or are both teams taking it to be value? At the start of the speeches, it looks to be value. Along the way, teams now begin telling us what they are going to do. One team is asked who they are. Another team is asked how they are going to ban, and they keep on giving responses. It could be value. If it is value, you just needed two questions to be answered. The question of what and why. If it is to be policy, then there were three questions. What, how, and then why. What are you advocating for? We are advocating for the ban. We are not advocating for the ban. Let's remain with them. How are you going to do the ban? How are you going to restrict whatever you're talking about? And then the why. Why are you saying there should be a ban? Why are you saying there shouldn't be a ban that is carrying across to the same? Now, from Team Affirmative, they are talking about the ban of the permanent membership and then giving pass to the UN General Assembly. And then from Team Negative was talking about not having the ban, but rather on increasing the number of permanent members and then putting other reforms, for example, restriction on the veto powers and all that. Now, Team Affirmative, if they ask you, if you have now decided to take it as value, then they keep on asking you, who are you? What are you going to do? Because at the end of the day, they ask you, what are you going to do? Then you said, no, we are going to ban the permanent membership and then we give the powers to the General Assembly. Now the question comes, so now does it mean you are entirely banning the UN Security Council? Because if you are saying you are going to ban the permanent members, then you are going to give the powers to the General Assembly. Now the question comes, does that now mean you are now totally doing away? So because yes, you can ban the permanent membership, but still the General Council that is now equally composed of the same retains its responsibility and powers as right in need to be. That's why you see in the third speech, they said there needs to be a question that, don't you think, actually, are you aware that the General Assembly does not have the powers? Because at the end of the day, the General Assembly is not an implementing body. The General Assembly is a legislative body. Just like there you see the Parliament of Uganda. The Parliament of Uganda does not guide and enforce or arresting people and what. That's why we have implementation bodies. So the General Assembly makes laws or makes legislation that all the bodies thereof follow. So the question comes this way, now you're saying you're going to give the powers to the General Assembly. So does it now mean you are entirely doing away with the Security Council? So it was not, in this debate, if you're taking it to be value, you didn't even need to answer the question of how you're going to do it. When they ask you now, that's why you see now, if you say we are going to do this, that's why they ask you now, who are you? So are you now taking it to be policy? Because if you're now taking it to be policy, it means you have to give the status quo, it means you have to give the work plan, it means you have to give the house, it means you also have to give the body. The next step to that, if you ever take anything to be policy and then you are looking at banning something, if there is already a law that governs the same, the biggest or one of the most fundamental conditions that you have to meet is to make an amendment of the law. These are the marks I could give. I give both of you 15 for style. Team Negative, you could carry more on style, but one of the judges told you, yeah, the truth of the matter is whoever comes to debate has made research and no one is ignorant. Maybe on another day you could just say that, maybe Speaker Sansa has not addressed his mind to the same. But the word used is really uncalled for. Content, I give both of you 26. Defense strategy, I give you 27. I give you 29. Making a total of 68 for Team Affirmative and a total of 70 for Team Negative. Thank you so much.
I won't say it was a fairly good debate. However, I think there are things that we should not lose out on, especially on such rounds. Things to do with style, I will not repeat, but I want to say let's have dignity and respect for each other. At the end of the day, it is about appreciating the other's ideas. But straight to judgment, for me, I got 4 arguments from affirmative team. Representation gaps, weakened global trust, accountability and transparency, sovereign equality of states. Now, the execution of these arguments is what became a problem. Then I get to quite a number of issues from negative, and basically simply because their primary role is to rebut, we get a lot of engagement towards the affirmatives. So first and foremost, I will not repeat on issues to do with policy and value. I'll go into what you discussed. On the issue of representation gaps, our negative team provides an alternative that, how about if we just expand the permanent membership? So at that point, it was not only a call to the affirmative to notice that it was time for them to also rebut on the issue of expanding, but it was also a call to the affirmative team to know that they should tell us how exclusive their representation will be in comparison to the negative representation. That besides the issue just being about representation, what exclusive benefit do we get from representation without permanent membership? And then what exclusive benefit do we get? What happens on their side if there is representation but still with permanent membership? The kind of response we get from negative team was that now if we just expand members, these still permanent members will still exist and they will continue doing things that they have been doing, issues to deal with veto. Now, the response that gets to that comes to a POI is a question that, is the problem about the presence of these certain countries in the permanent membership, or the problem is the permanence of these members? So at that point, is where we now fail to also agree on what exactly is the motion burden. So I feel like teams then fail out to understand on what the motion requires. Are we discussing permanent membership? One question. Are we discussing veto powers? Another question. But then, is the problem the presence of certain countries in the permanent membership, or simply the permanent membership? That's for you to reason out. So finally, why I think negative team takes for me this debate is an issue to deal with feasibility in terms of the legalities that they keep on questioning, but then two, on the backlash that happens, especially financially, and then issues to do with stability, having us to have power shifts to unstable countries that we cannot effectively rely on. So this kind of backlash is one that I feel like made your case sound more of inefficient in as much as achieving the goals that you wanted. These are the marks. I give negative team 15 for style. I give affirmative 16 simply because negative goes on to do things that are quite not called for within this debate. Respect for each other is paramount. Content, I give affirmative team 24. I give negative team 26. Strategy, I give affirmative team 26. I give negative team 28, making a total of 66 for the affirmative team and 69 for the negative team. So it is a unanimous decision that the negative team takes the debate. Thank you.